In this lesson, we're going to learn about data binding, which is a really powerful technique for very quickly hooking up interactivity in our app. I've changed around our code a little bit. I moved habit group up above habit item. I added some styles that we're going to use later in this lesson. And most noticeably, I added a green background to items that are done here. And I did that using a class called .done that's applied conditionally based on the value of the done prop. And then I style it here to add the green background. But the problem that we have in our system here is that clicking this doesn't actually change that background color. It's not updating the underlying data. And we can kind of prove this to ourselves if we put a div here and we output that value. So I'll output done. And now we can see the true value of this. It's true, false, true. And if I check the checkbox, that value is not changing. That explains why the background color is not changing. So we set the checked attribute to done, and that just sets the default value of the checkbox. It doesn't do anything to update the value of done when we click the checkbox. But we can really easily use data binding to fix this. So binding means we're going to hook up an input to a variable, in this case the done prop. Updating that input will update the variable, and Imba handles all of that, including re-rendering the view. So Imba has a special attribute called bind that you can add to input tags, and you set it equal to the value you want to bind to, which in this case is done, and let's try it out. Now you see not only does the background color change, but this value here, the true and false value, is changing, so we can see that we're actually updating the value of done. And then the tag re-renders with the new styles, and it's working nicely. But I don't actually want to use a checkbox here. I just put that because it was a quick way to build the UI, but I'd rather that these were buttons with no visible checkbox in them. So we can change label to a button tag, and then we can get rid of this checkbox. But we still need a way to do our binding. You can bind a Boolean to a button tag just like you can with a checkbox, and it works the same way. Clicking the button will toggle the Boolean value. So I want you to do this as a challenge. It's a pretty easy one. I've pasted in the prompt here. Change the label tag to a button tag, bind the button tag to the done prop, following what we did here, and then remove the checkbox. Just delete this line, and then test it out. Make sure it works. Go ahead, give that a try, and then I'll show you the solution. Okay, so we change label into a button tag. We add bind equals done, and then we delete the checkbox. Cool, that works, and you can see that not only can you bind a checkbox, you can also bind a button tag. But there's many more things you can bind, and you can find a list of all of them on imba.io, but one of the really common ones is a text input, so let's try that. And how about actually you do it? I put another challenge prompt here. What I want you to do is add an input tag with type equals text inside of the button tag, so somewhere in here, and then bind this new input to the name prop. That's this prop here. Give that a try. Make sure you run it and try testing it out and see how it works, and then I'll show you my solution. All right, here's how we do that. We can add a input, type equals text, bind equals name. Okay, that gives us a little text input here. And you can change the value. Let's put sleep. And you can see immediately as I type, it's updating the name down here below. So it's created a connection between the text input and the name prop. And we can see that reflected here. And the problem with our UI now is that we've got the input and this text both showing up. It would make a lot more sense if we had a way to go into an edit mode to see the text input. Then we could put a conditional here to say whether or not we're in edit mode and show the input if we are, or just the name if we're not. So let's add a new prop called editing, and I'll set it equal to false by default. And we'll use that to determine if we're in edit mode. So I can say if editing, show the input, else show the div. Okay, now we need a way to toggle this editing value. Well, we learned that we can have a button bound to a prop, and that will toggle the prop. So let's use that technique to toggle between edit mode and regular mode. So I'll put a button down here, bind equals editing, and we'll call that edit. And I added a style here, button.edit. So if we add the edit class, we'll get some nice styling on here. So we got a tiny little edit button. Clicking that toggles into edit mode. Let's do test. Click here, goes back to showing test. Great, so you can edit those now, but you probably also noticed when you click into these inputs, it's toggling the button behind it, so that's kind of weird. One way we could fix that would be to put the button inside of our conditional. So I'll take this button tag, put it down here. So now it's only actually a button tag if we're not in editing mode. And if we are in editing mode, we'll change it to a div tag. Okay, so editing mode, we have div.item, else button.item. Oh, and in editing mode, we don't need bind because it's just supposed to be a div. It's not supposed to change any values. Okay, so it works when we're not in editing mode. When we go into editing mode, this now changed into a div. So clicking in here doesn't change the value of the button.